She's also sharing about how brothers and sisters in Tzu shared inspiration with her in different ways. Okay, moving on to our speaker for the next session. So let's take a look at the video. And this is an opportunity for Dr. Lin, who shared a moment ago, to see her little sister on screen. So this right here is taken in San Francisco. So in many of these videos that we see of San Francisco, we can always see Sister Lulu. Here we can see our Tzu volunteers reaching out to a lot of the students from low-income families in San Francisco. Many times we look at the US and think, oh, they're such a rich country, but really there are many dark corners. You'll see here, Tzu volunteers are providing headphones for a lot of these low-income families and their students who had to begin virtual learning with the pandemic. And as part of these efforts in San Francisco, we've also been able to engage some of our younger volunteers, our young adult volunteers. So from these videos, we've really gotten a glimpse of the many different angles of all the work that the San Francisco volunteers are doing to help the students in their local communities. So let's welcome Sister Lulu to share with us her story. Let's go to San Francisco. Okay, now Sister Lulu is our main focus now. Brothers and sisters, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Very happy to have this opportunity to share with everyone about the stories in San Francisco. My sister, Dr. Lin, may not be very good at telling stories, but I'm going to share with you some of the stories from San Francisco. So some of what you saw in the videos earlier, you could see a lot of these low-income families, which unfortunately, there are many such families who have more unfortunate circumstances like this. So what we want to do as Tzu volunteers is to be like little fireflies, flying here, flying there, gathering together to light up our communities and those around us and bring light and hope. So let's take a look at my PowerPoint here. So the topic I want to share about today is the hidden residents of San Francisco's Chinatown and their station of blessings, which we'll explain what that means later. So it may be hard to think about what it really means to be the hidden residents, but I'll share with everyone really quick how we in Tzu Chi, San Francisco connected with Chinatown. And this is actually 28 years ago, December 1994, where Tzu Chi volunteers first set up Tzu Chi's San Francisco Service Center. And it was actually on Powell Street in San Francisco, Chinatown, where we set up our first office as well. And we started off thinking, what can we do to really help our community? And so we knew we wanted to be good members of the community and reach out to the local community. So we began with street cleaning and street sweeping activities. 5 years later or so, in 1999, we did buy a new office and moved to the Sunset District, so away from Chinatown. See, those are some of our videos or photos from our first office in Chinatown. Now, in 2008, we actually, in some ways, returned to Chinatown, not the office, but because we began to engage with an elementary school there, Gordon J. Lau Elementary School, and we did weekly food pantry events. And we would do weekly food pantry events all the way through to 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So that was 12 years and 2 months of weekly food pantry events for the low-income students at Gordon J. Lau Elementary School. So you can see that on these photos, regardless of the weather or situation, we would always be at these events. And on the top left photo, you can see that this volunteer, he would spend an hour and a half commuting each way, I believe, to help with these food pantry events. So in the 4 years between 2008 and 2012, Tzu Chi took responsibility of going to the food bank and purchasing the food that they would share at the food pantry with the students. The food was priced at 18 cents per pound, with fruits and vegetables provided for free. Now, in 2012, we were actually given the status of, it translates more or less to the lifetime member by the food bank because of the constant work that we were doing in the community, helping these kids. We were given that status, which gave us about $21,000 USD to support in these food costs for these students in acquiring these foods. So we can take a look at some of the statistics here. We had over these 12 years, for example, we can see that we had 430 such events. We had many millions of pounds of food distributed, helped many, many different families, low-income families and students. And the impact is really, really tremendous over the years. And through these food bank events, we ourselves as Tzu Chi volunteers also learned a lot. Especially as the pandemic continued to worsen, stepping into the community, we could really see just how much pain and suffering there was. When the pandemic hit, because of shelter in place, had in virtual learning. But for a lot of these low-income students, their source of food was often from the meals provided at school, which meant that for a lot of these low-income families, unfortunately, that meant they were losing their source of daily food. And specifically at the elementary we worked with, there were about 200 students that were considered homeless. And so the school reached out to community organizations, hoping that folks could help these families with their providing basic necessities, including food. So when we heard about this, we reached out to the school and asked the current situation. We learned that there were fundraisers done, but there were still about 20 families that needed support. And we asked the principal, man, how are there so many students here that are considered homeless? And the principal explained that actually, for anybody that isn't living in an actual structural home, for example, a lot of folks live in single room occupancy situations, which really means that these low income residents get small single rooms that maybe have basic furnishings like a bed and a desk, something like that. Rooms that are commonly smaller than 100 square feet, right? A lot of folks who live in these single room occupancy situations with no bathrooms or kitchens of their own, and in kind of a shared community space in a building shared with a lot of other people, these folks are all considered homeless too, because they don't have single homes of their own. They're living in these low income accommodations. And you can see some of what these single room occupancy situations look like here in these photos. We can see that in Chinatown's a very vibrant place, right? It's always very lively. There's a lot of busy traffic, yet above a lot of these shops that we have come to know, there are a lot of these single room occupancy situations, thousands of these families. So whereas in many ways, we see kind of the glamour of San Francisco, underneath there's a population that is hidden from society, these families living these single room occupancy situations hidden away from society. So in the 12 years that we were doing these food bank events, we didn't know that there were 200 of these students, so many of these students that were living in these single room occupancy situations. In that one small room, usually smaller than 100 square feet, many times there was a whole family living together in there. And we can often see bunk situations because there's not enough space. There's no bathroom or kitchen within the room. For some of the luckier rooms, they might have had a sink in the room. So that one small room was the bedroom, it was the living room, it was where they had to try their clothes, and the one desk had to serve as a dining table as well as a desk for studying or working or anything else. And how did they split the kitchen and the bathroom and everything else? It was based on, everyone living there had to figure it out for themselves, and often it was based on folks' different work schedules and etc. So amidst the pandemic, our volunteers continued to go into the community, helping folks in various ways, including, for example, earlier in the video, you saw the work we were doing with these students, the resources we were providing them. And for these 200 students, we were regularly caring for them. On the bottom left here, in this very small space, as you can see, there were 4 people living there, actually 3 different generations. Many times, grandma would be on the bunk bed on top. On the bottom, it would be mom and the kid on that bed, sharing that bed together. And then where does dad sleep? Dad sleeps on the floor. And so during the day, the kid uses that desk right there to study. And at night, it becomes where the dad sleeps. So in this famous, the worldwide, the city famous across the world as San Francisco, there are these thousands, tens of thousands of families living in these situations. So the principal of the elementary school shared that there were 20 cases that they wanted folks to help with. There were folks in families with domestic violence, folks maybe lost their income or other challenging circumstances. And so we as city volunteers decided to help some of these families connect with each other, because amidst the pandemic, it's often very hard to connect aside from over the phone, or just we have to stand outside and talk, but it's hard to really connect with these folks and hear about all of their suffering, and have these deep heart to hearts that typically we would be able to have more opportunities to do if we weren't in a pandemic. So we decided to connect some of these families together into what we call these stations of blessings, allowing these families to meet each other, learn about each other's stories, and help each other in through a lot of the challenging circumstances they were facing together, right? And a lot of these folks, they shared perhaps similar stories, similar hardships. Their children went to similar schools. So there was definitely a connection to be made there. And we also were able to work with local businesses, specifically a bakery called, I believe it was iCafe Chinatown, who also was very inspired by City volunteers and decided that she wanted to help with these events as well. So a lot of these Station of Blessings events, where these families would gather together, would be at this iCafe Chinatown bakery. And the owner herself was also very inspired by City volunteers. Originally, she thought about closing the shop during the pandemic, but she felt that she received strength and courage from City volunteers and decided to keep the shop open and continue. Now, through these stations of blessings, through these families being able to connect with each other, of course, fortunately, we were able to help with relieving some of their suffering as well. But of course, we want to do more than that. We want to help people not only by relieving their immediate suffering, but also to share wisdom and dharma with them so that they may better help themselves and even others in need. So this is what we call our station of blessings. Very grateful to have this opportunity to share the story of us being fireflies in the San Francisco community. So thank you, everyone. So it's like Sister Sijing often shares, in what is considered to be a very prosperous United States, there really are these many, many dark corners. So yes, it is definitely a blessing to hear that a lot of these families and individuals struggling have the opportunity to connect through these stations of blessings. Yep. Okay. So some of the other comments we're hearing from our listeners online, folks